Hi everybody, I am doing a lesson about using brackets while you're quoting because a few of you had questions about how to do this. So this second part of No Red Ink is about matching pronouns and verbs between the context, which is your own words, and what's inside of the quotes. So, sometimes what's inside of the quotes doesn't match with your pronouns or your verbs that you're using in your sentence. So in order for it to match, you need to change some of the words that are inside the quote. And when you change any word that's inside quotation marks, you have to use the bracket to show that this new word is a word that you changed. That, originally inside the quote, it's something else. So let's take a look. This is so that our quotes flow and blend better. Okay. So it says here to make sure that flow quote fully blends with the writing around it, we need to adjust, meaning change the pronouns and the verbs to match the writing that's before the quote. And we use brackets to let our reader know that we have made this change. So pronouns are like, I, me, mine, that, and you, she, it, they. These pronouns replace proper nouns. So I replaces Mrs. Zuckert. I is a pronoun that replaces the noun Mrs. Zuckert. Okay. Tanya left the door open. She would be the pronoun that replaces Tanya. So these pronouns replace the nouns that are before them. And they have to match singular with singular, plural with plural. You wouldn't say Tanya left the door open. They forgot to close the door. That doesn't make sense. You would have to say Tanya left the door open. She forgot to close the door to match the pronouns. So that's pronoun matching, okay? And it's about singular and plural pronoun matching. So they give you an example here, just like the example that I gave you. If it's inside the quotation marks and we are either changing or adding, right? If we add a word inside the quote to make it flow better and sound better, we still have to do the brackets. So brackets are for adding words inside the quotation marks or changing words inside the quotation marks in order to make the sentence flow better. So this example is really important. After she volunteers as tribute, Katniss realizes that everyone will make note of, and we change it to Katniss. We change Katniss. Oh, we changed my because the original quote was my, right? We have to change it to her because it matches with the sentence that we're writing. Katniss realizes that everyone will make note of, instead of my tears, it's her tears to match with the sentence that we're writing. If we don't change it, it would read, after she volunteers as tribute, Katniss realizes that everyone will make note of my tears. Well, that doesn't make sense because my is not Katniss, who I'm talking about. And then we changed from and I'll be marked as an easy target to and she'll be marked as an easy target. So here we changed the pronouns my to her to match Katniss, which is what we wrote in our sentence. So that's when we change the words inside the quote to match the noun that's outside of the quote, okay? When not to alter quotations, okay? So a flow quote blends into the text around it. Writers sometimes need to replace or change words so that the quote matches their own writing. So that's when we use brackets. With colon quotes and dialogue quotes, no changes are necessary. So when we set up the quote as a dialogue or as like a colon, which is also set up as dialogue, we don't need to change inside the quotation mark. And here's what I mean. Our sentence is set up for dialogue when we say, Katniss explains to the reader. So this is speaker, listener, how different she and Prim are. And here's the colon. And now inside the quotation mark is what Katniss says. So I don't need to change it because this is her saying, I don't bother suggesting Prim learn to hunt because I'm saying that she's saying this. Now, if I didn't set up the quote as a dialogue saying she's saying this, then I would need to change it, right? So if I didn't say Katniss explains to the reader, and I just said Katniss, right, explains how I don't bother suggesting, well, then that wouldn't make sense. So if I wrote my sentence that way, I would need to change the I to she. And it would be written as Katniss explains how she doesn't bother suggesting. So it depends on how you set up the sentence. If you set up the sentence so that the quoted part is dialogue, then we don't need to change that quoted part to match, right, the noun. But if you set up the quoted part as just like details, right, then it needs to match the noun that's in the regular part of the sentence. So this is when you want to change it, is if you're just quoting and you're not setting up the quote as dialogue, you have to change the words inside the quotation mark. So we change the pronouns to match the noun Katniss. But when we set it up as dialogue, we're saying Katniss says this about herself. So we don't need to change the pronouns in here, the pronoun which is I. We don't need to change it because we're saying Katniss is saying this about herself. So this is just a review of when to alter words and when not to. Now this is about verbs. Your verbs have to match tense-wise. So sometimes we write in present perfect tense, but the verb in the quote is in past tense. We have to keep the same tense throughout our sentence. So the tense has to stay the same. For example, Harry spends Christmas alone at Hogwarts, yet the word was didn't. Didn't doesn't match with spends. Spends is present perfect and didn't is past tense. So because it doesn't match, we have to change it to match the verb that's in our own words. So spends matches with doesn't, and that's why we changed it. So the tense has to stay the same. When not to alter quotations and when to alter. So here is an example of when we don't change the verb tense because it's the same. Katniss explains to the reader how different she and Prim are. Here we set up the quote as dialogue, so we don't need to change it if it's set up as dialogue. Okay, anytime we're saying that a character says this, whatever the character says is what they said. So we don't need to change it. It's only when we use that quote or that dialogue in our sentence as detail and we're not setting it up as the character says this, that's when we need to change it to match the verb or the pronouns in the sentence that we created. I hope that helps, and we'll talk some more about this on Wednesday.